How's it going, everyone? We are back again for some Week 4 FanDuel quarterbacks. We got Spencer with us. How's it going, Spencer?
Pretty good. Really looking forward to this week. We have some really good expensive plays and some pretty good cheap plays. So a lot of different directions you could go at quarterback on FanDuel this week.
Yeah, I like that. First week of buys. And so last week I kind of had an uncomfortable feeling. Like I knew there were going to be a lot of games where everything felt really volatile to me. I know some people loved it. This week feels a lot more straightforward to me, especially at quarterback. So I do like this week quite a bit better.
Yeah, and you can say that now, but we might need to do a recap pod and see how you feel maybe Monday.
When I'm just a battered man from all the bad
Yeah.
beats I took. Yeah, okay. That's fair.
Through tears and Kleenexes, just saying what went wrong. What's your outlook on life at the moment? Things like that.
Oh, yeah. So Monday morning around 4, I've accepted the pain, I think. So that's like the worst time for any type of thoughts from me. But yeah, no, that always a possibility. I will say for quarterbacks though, looking at some cash games, you threw out Cam Newton versus the Falcons. I think this is a pretty safe play in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at Cam, he's faced some pretty good defenses. You have Minnesota and then that opener at Denver. Just not good spots for him to succeed. But then he went off against the 49ers at home. And the Falcons, I mean, over the season, it's only 3 weeks in, but they've gotten toasted by Jameis Winston, Derek Carr, and then last week Drew Brees, even though they ran away with that game. So you just have to figure that Cam Newton's going to continue that trend, eat him up, maybe get a rushing touchdown, maybe throw for 3. The Panthers have one of the highest implied team totals despite playing on the road at Atlanta. So everything just really comes together. There's some good running backs that are cheap. You can go cheap at tight end. Hunter Henry's one that I'm just going to throw out, assuming Antonio Gates is still out. So, I mean, you can go cheap at one of your wide receiver spots too, and I think it's worth it to pay up for Cam Newton because this just looks like one of his 25 to 30-plus fantasy point weeks.
And generally speaking, I think, years later, the field is a lot sharper in tournaments now, and people don't like paying up for quarterback anymore. We already saw it 1 week with Cam. I think this is another nice week. As you mentioned, there are some pay downs at tight end. Is Zach Miller? I know this is a quarterback show. Are you looking at Zach Miller too?
I am too, and that'll kind of tie into another play, which I'm sure you can guess right now. One that I didn't write up, but I also like. Why don't I just say him right now?
All right, you know what? We need a Brian Hoyer minute here.
Yeah.
I'm kind of excited about it. What are your thoughts?
He's only 6K on FanDuel, so certainly within tournament consideration there. You can do a lot with your lineup if you just strike that combination of Hoyer and Zach Miller, which, I mean, that combination looked pretty good last week, Sunday night game at Dallas. Granted, a lot of that came in garbage time, but that could be the situation yet again this week, and we don't really mind that for fantasy purposes as long as he's, chucking it and throwing for touchdowns. So Brian Hoyer, not a bad quarterback overall. He could realistically put up another 18 to 20 fantasy points, which is all you really want out of him at, almost minimum salary for a quarterback.
Yeah, and again, I wrote this up for DK, but Alshon Jeffrey probably isn't DeAndre Hopkins, but he's like good enough. He's a good enough go up and get it guy that Hoyer can kind of just lob it up to him. And as you mentioned, Zach Miller and him look like a pretty good combination. So yeah, I think he gets his points against this defense at least at some point.
Yeah, in Detroit, I mean, they've gotten toasted through the air so far. I know it's Aaron Rodgers, Andrew Luck carving them up. But Hoyer, I mean, he does have some ability. He's an experienced quarterback, so he could definitely do some damage as well.
And your other cash game guy is the other side of that game, Matthew Stafford, 8,300 against this Bears team that literally just lost their top cover corner for the season to IR, and I mean has just looked putrid, the first 3 weeks of the season.
Yeah, and consider the past 2 weeks that they played 2 rookie quarterbacks. I mean, granted, Carson Wentz and Dak Prescott aren't your prototypical rookies, they look more experienced than some of these veteran guys early in the season. But they've given up some really efficient games to those two guys. Now you get Matthew Stafford coming in, who's really probably having the best run of his career at this point. In Detroit, they just love to throw the ball, especially with Amir Abdullah out. That's one less option on their offense to hand the ball off. So the Lions, they just really like to throw the ball. Like I mentioned in the write-up, bubble screens, running back dump passes, things like that. That's kind of their extended running game right now. So all of it really funnels a lot of points to Matthew Stafford. And the matchup is not very imposing at Chicago. So he's $1,000 cheaper than Cam if you really don't have the extra grand to pay up for Newton. I think Stafford is a safe fallback option that could give you realistically within the same range of fantasy points.
And as you mentioned, the loss of Abdullah, I mean, Theo Riddick, that's points for Stafford when Riddick gets going, that's just dump offs. So I love Stafford's situation. Marvin Jones is balling. So yeah, I'm certainly in on that. I think those two are the pretty clear cash options. In terms of tournaments, I want to talk about the second one you listed first, Kirk Cousins versus the Browns. I think you might be able to get a little lower ownership just because of how bad he's been so far this year. But as we saw last week with the Dolphins, this is probably a pretty good matchup, right?
Right. And I mentioned in the write-up that, yeah, he's received a lot of criticism. He hasn't really been performing at the right times, and it hasn't really translated well for the Redskins. But from a pure fantasy perspective, I mean, you take out that week one game against Pittsburgh where Washington just really didn't look ready. His fantasy stat lines aren't horrible. I mean, there's some hope there, and you consider this is his best matchup so far, maybe one of his best matchups of the season. It's at home where he's typically performed much, much better. I mean, we're talking near Drew Brees-like home road splits. So, I mean, it really all kind of comes together this week for Cousins in that passing game. I like combining him with Jordan Reed, another guy who's been underwhelming this far in the season. Maybe even Deshaun Jackson, Jamison Crowder is kind of an off-the-board play that's cheap that I'd like to pair with him as well. So I think, his price where it stands too, I think a lot of people will be looking maybe going up to Stafford or going cheaper with Prescott rather than taking a chance with Cousins. So you could get him at a lower ownership rate.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the fantasy stat lines haven't been horrible. His efficiency in the red zone has been bad, but he's literally second in red zone attempts right now. So, I mean, he's getting there a ton. That's going to translate at some point in the year. I think, yeah. I mean, I won't say he's borderline cash for me, but I will say he's borderline cash for me.
I don't have any qualms about that at all. Yeah. I mean, like you said, that's going to translate into fantasy production at some point in time, and they really don't have that great of a rushing threat. I mean, we're kind of talking along the same lines as Matthew Stafford and the Lions, where they're going to pass in the red zone. They're going to go to Jordan Reed. They're going to try things like that and put the ball in Cousins' hands. They're not just going to hand off and let a battering ram running back go through for 10 yards for the score.
Certainly, and as you mentioned, love the stack with Jordan Reed this week. I think that'll be under-owned. Phillip Rivers against the Saints. I mean, we all saw it in prime time. Normally, like when a team gets shelled in prime time, you kind of think, okay, maybe this isn't going to be as bad, and maybe avoid it. You don't avoid the Saints defense.
Right. And I'm having trouble predicting where exactly Rivers' ownership rate will be at. He kind of underwhelmed last week at the Colts. That looked like a good matchup on paper. He really didn't do much. Even though that was more of a game flow type of thing, just kind of a weird game all around if you watch that. And Rivers typically performs a lot better at home. He has an outstanding matchup against the Saints, who have been torched pretty much in every game this season. Even that Giants game where they didn't give up many points, they were still giving up tons and tons of yardage. It was just inefficiency in the red zone and turnovers that led to more of a low-scoring game there. So green light matchup all around. Danny Woodhead's out. Phillip Rivers is just going to have to chuck the ball more and more and more. There's some concern that Melvin Gordon will take away from Rivers a little bit because, that Saints rushing defense almost just as bad as their passing defense, as we saw on Monday night with Tevin Coleman and Devonta Freeman just running all over the place. But I think there's certainly room for both of those guys, Melvin Gordon and Phillip Rivers, to eat and get their fantasy points they need to pay off their salaries.
The Saints are a team, their defense at this point is the team that bad players just go off against, and then you look at their season-long totals at the end, and you're like, wait, this guy wasn't this. Oh, he played the Saints defense.
Yep.
Right?
That inflated his overall and 5 passing touchdowns.
Yeah.
Like Bortles, it just upped his TD INT ratio that much and made him look better than what he actually is, type of thing.
Exactly. So, yeah, I like Rivers. Again, you mentioned might be a little tough to figure out the stack, but Travis Benjamin, Terrell Williams, all in play in tournaments for me.
You can go multiple ways in tournaments if you're doing multiple entry there.
And you threw in that Hunter Henry play, which I really like if Gates is out. The last one you write in, other than Hoyer, Dak Prescott, a nice value against the 49ers. That week 1 against the Rams, I was like very impressed. I was like, hey, you know what? This Rams offense isn't going to be that great, but Niners look good. Wrong. They're awful. Dak should be able to figure out some fantasy points along the line here. What are you looking at?
Yeah, and I mentioned in the write-up that, the Niners rank 17th overall in pass defense, which is below average at this point in the season. And that's even considering that the Rams basically did nothing in the passing game against them in week 1. So that just goes to show you how bad they've been in the other 2 weeks against Seattle and Cam Newton and the Panthers. So I think Dak just really won't have much of a problem at all. There is a little bit of concern with game flow here that the Niners and the Cowboys both will just run the ball, chew the clock, and Dak's not going to have his passing attempts and his shots at the red zone that we'd like him to have. But I think the matchup is really too good, and the price considering is just too good to really let that kind of psych you out and talk you out of this play. If you need value, obviously I would prefer to go up to Cam Newton, Matthew Stafford, maybe take a shot on Cousins. But if you need the value, Prescott's a safe cash game play. As we saw, he can do a lot with his legs. 40 rushing yards and a touchdown, really not out of the question. He's done it the past 2 weeks. And then that passing touchdown is coming. At some point it will. A lot of people look at that and say that, he hasn't thrown for a passing touchdown, so what's going on there? 2 plays last Sunday night. I think it was Cole Beasley and Jason Witten were down at the 1-yard line. So it's more attributed to bad luck than him getting the looks. So, he'll I think I'm going to call it. He's going to have 1 or 2 passing touchdowns this week and 1 on the ground. So I definitely like Dak Prescott.
I like it, and I do find it interesting. While the Cowboys are much better offensively than the Rams, they do play a similar way. Which is just pound the ball. And I wonder if Chip, tries to speed things up and maybe, catches them early with a few scores. If that's the case, I think Dak could really, really look to exceed value here. As far as him compared to the rest, I think with the 1,200 difference, we're probably rolling Hoyer, but I think Dak's a really nice tournament guy for sure.
Right now, I think that'll kind of speak to him being lower owned as well, because you do have a cheaper option below him that it makes a lot of sense to go for in tournaments that could put up a similar total. So if you're looking at it from a tournament perspective, that kind of adds some sneaky rationale to it.
Certainly. Well, hopefully this helps you guys out. This is certainly where the bases of a lot of my lineups are starting. So both cash and tournaments, good luck this week, guys. As always, if you like what we're doing, check out our YouTube channel and give us a like and subscribe. Check out our optimizer. I know I use it every week, and the other tools there and written content. As always, we'll check you guys in week 5. Thanks for tuning in.